Hi, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to our second Ask an Expert. My name is Aiden. I'm a librarian at Sunnyvale Public Library. The idea behind this series is sometimes you have a question you haven't been able to find the answer to, and you wish that you could just ask an expert. So this is your chance to do that. Our expert today is Karen Schaffer. Karen is a volunteer with the UC Master Gardener program of Santa Clara County. Master gardeners are trained by the University of California Cooperative Extension to provide science-based gardening advice to their local communities. Karen has been a master gardener since 2003 and has been gardening for many years before that. She especially enjoys growing vegetables because she loves to cook. If you're joining us live, please say hello in the comments so Karen can see you, and drop any questions you'd like Karen to answer in the comments at any point during the stream. If you're watching the recording after the fact, you can direct your questions to the Master Gardener's Help Desk. The link is in the description. So without further ado, I will hand it over to UC Master Gardener, Karen Schaffer.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to talking about vegetables, one of my favorite subjects ever. And we will get started with a couple of questions that we think you might have, and we're hoping that you will start asking some questions as we go along. So, how much should I water my vegetable garden? This is a really common question that we get asked, and the answer, unfortunately, is not a simple 3 times a week or for 10 minutes or anything like that, because it all depends on what it is that you're watering and what time of year it is and how big the plants are and all of these questions. So it depends. So if you've just planted some seeds, the water needs to be right where those seeds are. If you have seedlings that you've planted, then it needs to be where the roots of those seedlings are. And initially, those roots are going to be just right below the surface. That's what needs to be watered. Then, as the plant grows, it'll be sending its roots further down into the soil, which is good. And then you want the water to be going down deeper. So seeds you need to water very frequently, probably every day if it's not raining, and then to keep that top layer of soil moist right where the seeds are. Seedlings, they may need watering every day if it's really hot, maybe every other day, it depends. And then as the roots go down, then you want to water less frequently but deeper so that the water goes down and where the roots are, because you don't want the roots to stay up in that top level of soil where it's very shallow. You want the roots to go down deep where they'll stay cool and the water will last longer. So there's a big it depends. When the seedlings are bigger and it's hot in the summer, the plant is going to be using a lot more water. So in that case, you'll have to be watering maybe more frequently. Days like this where it's 80, 90 degrees out there, the plants are respiring. They are actually taking water up and letting it go into the air. And that's what they need to do to live. And so we have to make sure that we are keeping them full of water. So it depends on that. In the winter, we'll have rain. And you won't need to water so much because it'll be raining and helping you out. Also, it's cooler, so the plants won't be respiring as much. And then it depends on what your soil is like. Does your soil retain water well? Does your soil drain super well? Now, here in Santa Clara Valley, we're lucky because we've got clay soil. And I hear people saying, what? We're lucky because we have clay soil? Yes, we're lucky because we have clay soil. Clay soil has a lot of great nutrients in it, and it retains water. So, okay, it's not good if it's just the clay soil. That gets a little too sticky and messy, and it can get waterlogged. But when you amend that clay soil with some compost and some other organic amendments like that, you can get a really beautiful loamy soil that retains water well, which helps in our dry summer. Because unlike other places in the country, we don't get any rain in the summer, and so we have to be providing all of the water ourselves. And vegetables do take a lot of water. So if we're in a drought situation, you can still grow vegetables. You can make a good case for it being water effective to grow vegetables at home yourself. But you have to use your water well, and you have to use your water wisely. And that means making sure that you give your vegetables enough water so that they grow well. Because if you water them and then you forget to water them and they died, well, now all the water you used on them, that's been wasted. So make sure you keep them watered well, watered evenly, but don't overwater, because plants can drown. You can suffocate a plant by putting so much water into the soil that it closes off the pores, and they don't have oxygen. They do actually need some oxygen in the soil to help them respire. So the right amount of water. And how do you tell if you're getting the right amount of water to the roots of the plant? You stick your finger in the soil, or you dig with a trowel. But really, you just have to actually look and see how damp it is down there. It's kind of a simple thing, but it's amazing how many people I've talked to who don't actually stick their finger in the soil to find out if there's enough water. So there you go, a very long answer to a short but kind of complex question. So, do we have another question? Oh, what can we still plant this season? That is a great question. It's true, we are well into the summer, so that makes it a little trickier here. But we have a wonderful resource on our website. It's a vegetable planting chart, and it's divided according to the months, and it shows what you can plant either by transplants or by seeds in any given month of the year. And my fellow master gardener Louise is on this all as well, and she's going to put up links occasionally whenever I mention something that has a link. So she will put the vegetable planting chart up so you can go take a look at it. So June, all right, so we're well into the summer already, but we are lucky to have a really long growing season. And that means that there are still quite a number of things that you can plant. You could probably get away with planting, say, some cherry tomatoes. They're pretty fast. You could plant, well, even some eggplants and peppers, especially if you're willing to, if you like green peppers. It'll be a little dicey for them to ripen up to red or yellow. The hot chili peppers, they would work. Some of the eggplants are pretty fast. And then there's a bunch of things. You could plant beets. You could plant, oh, let's see, what else is on the list, Louise? Some of the greens might work. And go take a look at the list and you'll see some ideas. It would be good to do things from transplants, which means going to a nursery and getting them there. And it does mean that you're probably going to be harvesting them later than you would if you had planted earlier, but that's okay. Oh, summer squash, definitely. You can definitely plant zucchini and other kinds of summer squash. They don't take very long to start bearing at all. Beans are another good one. Especially bush beans, they're pretty fast. Okay. And so I hope that answered your question, gave you a few ideas of things that you can plant now. Do we have another question? What herbs will do well in a morning shaded planter? So that means that you're going to be having the afternoon sun on that planter. So that does mean you want ones that are a little sturdier and can take a little more heat. And that's true actually for an awful lot of herbs. Most herbs, in fact, can take full sun. So you're not really very restricted with that. You could grow rosemary easily. You could grow basil. Basil does like a little bit of afternoon shade, so it might be a little too hot for the basil. But you could grow thyme. A lot of the perennial herbs are very sturdy and very tough, and in fact don't need a lot of water, which can be an advantage with a container. Let's see. How about another question? How do I keep indeterminate cherry tomato plant from sprawling all over outside and beyond its 5.5 foot tall and 24-inch diameter cage? Yes, cherry tomatoes are basically vines and they do want to just go sprawling. So what you can do is just clip off any parts that are going out of bounds. They will be sending out so many new shoots and they will be sending out so many flowers that you're going to get plenty of production. The other thing is that as the season grows on and it gets to be September, then you really want to snip off any flower clusters that are starting to develop because it's not going to have time to ripen those. Well, it depends on how long you like to let them go. Some people like to let them go until December. I don't actually think that they taste very good when you let them ripen when it's getting to be cold weather. But at some point, you just decide it's not going to be able to ripen them anymore. And so you can clip off the flowers, you can clip off the excess growth and just make it focus on the ones that it has. So even when it's starting to grow out of bounds, go ahead, prune it. Tomatoes are tough and they're productive, especially cherry tomatoes. Great question. Yes. Do we have another question? Is there any way to stop cilantro bolting? No, there is not. Cilantro is a very fast herb, and the best thing for you to do is what we call succession planting. So that means that you plant a small patch of it, and then 2 weeks later you plant another small patch, and 2 weeks later you plant another small patch, and then you just keep going around and around because those first patches are always going to be bolting, as you say. Bolting, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, means sending up a flower stalk and going to seed. And certain plants, cilantro is one of them. It's very, very fast, and it's frustrating because we want to have it around constantly. So that's the thing to do, is succession planting with that. There are a couple of varieties that say something like slow bolt or slow, and they are ones that somebody has selected to try to find the ones, the plants that are slowest to bolt, and they've taken the seeds from those. And if you save seeds yourself from cilantro, there's a little trick. Try to save them from the ones that were the last ones to bolt, not the first ones, because if you save the last ones, you'll be selecting for the slowest ones. Hope that helps. Okay, another question? I bought a garlic chives transplant, but I'm running out of pots. Will they grow in a shallow bowl type pot, probably only 3 to 4 inches deep, or are the roots too deep for that? Well, garlic chives, so we actually have a great new section on our website about container gardening. And so you can go read about some stuff there. And we're going to be having a section on herb gardening, which isn't there yet, but we have some herbs on our website already. I have garlic chives growing in my garden, and in my experience, they are kind of shallow rooted, and I would give them a shot. They're also really, really tough, and they seem to grow. Mine are growing without any additional summer water at all, and they've been growing for years. So I think it would probably be fine. It might not be ideal for a container, but I'd say go ahead and try it. You'll probably be okay. Just keep an eye on them and make sure they don't dry out. Because in containers, they would need watering. Do we have another question? Oh, should I prune tomatoes branches off of the bottom? Right, and also suckers. That's something else that people often ask us about. So suckers are when you have the tomato stem like this and you have a leaf coming out, and everywhere that a leaf joins the stem, there's a little incipient bud, and it will grow out to be another branch, and it will have fruit on it, and it's, that's fine if you want it to be that full. Now, you might have seen advice, typically from garden books that are advising people who live in the more northerly climates that you should pinch out all of the suckers. And I'm from Minnesota originally, and when I lived in Minnesota, I did pinch out the suckers because we had such a short growing season. We let it grow a single stalk. We made it really focus on the tomatoes, those first tomatoes that it set, and we hoped that they would have time to ripen. We don't have that problem here. In fact, we've got a lot of sun coming in. So it's actually good to let the suckers grow for us. We have a long growing season. The tomatoes are going to have plenty of time. They can have lots of growth. The extra growth will help shade the tomatoes that are in there because tomatoes can get sunburned. If you've ever seen a tomato that has a sort of whitish patch on it, that's sunburn that happened to that tomato. So you want good foliage cover. So it's good to let a lot of the foliage go. Not about, going back to that cherry tomato question, not as much of a problem for cherry tomatoes. They don't seem to get sunburned. It's more the beefsteaks and such that will get these patches on them. So all of that said, letting your suckers grow. If they get to be too much, if the cage is getting too full and you can't even get your hands in there, go ahead, take some of them out. And then the ones on the bottom, yes, I actually like to prune the bottom branches around there because they are getting shaded out, so they often turn yellow. If there's any kind of soil-borne disease coming up, they will, they can transmit it up the stalk, but mostly they're just turning yellow and looking ugly, and I like to get them out of there, and then that way I can better reach in there to harvest the tomatoes that are inside there. So yes, tomatoes are actually pretty tough. You can do a lot with them. I bought some basil. Oh, why are my cucumber leaves yellowing around the edges? So it's always difficult to tell about questions like this. We have on our website, we have a whole section on vegetable gardening. And if you go to our garden help section, the vegetable section there, you can click on every individual vegetable. And we talk about how to grow it, and then we talk about possible pests and diseases that they might have. So the best thing to do when you're for a question like yellowing is to go look at that, because there's a lot of different causes for that. So you can go there. Then we link from our site to the University of California's Integrated Pest Management site. And that's a great site with a lot of information. On our site, we highlight the most common pests here for Santa Clara County, and then we link to that one if you want further information. The other thing that you can do is send an email to our help desk. So we have a link to our Ask Us a Question page, and the people who are on the help desk may email you back. They may ask you more questions. They may ask you how you've been watering it. They might ask you about fertilizer. They might ask if it's new leaves or old leaves that are yellowing. There's so many questions. It really is a dialogue to try to figure out what in that particular case might be the cause. I hope that helps. All right, I have a couple of squirrel-planted volunteer apricot trees. I know the fruit will not come true, but the rootstock is growing so well that I'm interested in learning how to graft. Where and when do I start? I'm guessing this is a wintertime activity. It absolutely is, and the people that you want to get to know is the California Rare Fruit Growers Association. It's a wonderful group of people, and every January they do a scion exchange where they collect cuttings of all sorts of different fruit trees and get together. I'm not sure how it's going to go next January, but let's hope it'll still happen. And they give classes on grafting, and it's just a fabulous resource, and that's what you'll want to do. Okay. I bought some basil plants from the grocery store. How can I make them last longer? Well, you could certainly plant them in the ground, or you could plant them in a bigger pot. The ones that are from the grocery store have been grown fast and lushly to be very, very tender. And they're wonderful. They're really wonderful. Very delicious. Make very excellent pesto with them. But you can keep them going for quite a while. What you need to do, and this is true for basil plants that are in the ground as well, what you need to do is snip off the leaves so that they don't start to flower. Because when they flower, the plant is essentially saying, okay, I'm done reproducing. I don't need to keep growing nice, tender, lush leaves. So that would be the two things. Plant them into another container, give them a little more soil and water. Give them a little bit of afternoon shade. They do like shade. And just keep snipping them off, and make sure you snip down far enough so that you're not leaving the flower tips. I hope that made sense. Okay. How do I know when my arugula, turnip, and collard seedlings are ready to transplant? And is it bad to transplant in super hot weather? So typically we say that you want to transplant your seedlings when they have good, strong growth and are tall enough and sturdy enough that they are going to last outside by themselves and be able to survive any pests. So, you probably want them to be 4 inches tall, something like that, and have a good number of leaves on it. If they just are barely this big, that's a little tough. But it is absolutely very, very difficult to transplant in hot weather, which is one of the reasons why we don't, if you look at our planting chart, we don't have a whole lot recommended for transplanting in July and August, simply because it is so hot then. So, but of course, we do have ups and downs in our weather, so try to transplant when we're having one of our slightly cooler spells. Try to give your plants a little bit of shade. You can just rig up something over them to temporarily shade them. There's also this stuff called row cover. It's very lightweight fabric, and it's immensely useful in the garden. You can buy it online. It's called Row, R-O-W, cover. And it's very, very light, very, very light. So you can put it over plants. You can provide a little bit of shade for them. You can put it over plants to protect them from, say, birds and insects and things like that. There's a number of ways that we use it. Okay. What kinds of vegetables can I grow in the shade along with basil? Well, let me just say, I didn't say that basil can grow in the shade. It does want sun. It just wants maybe some afternoon shade. So maybe like from 3 o'clock on, but almost all vegetables require at least 4 to 6 hours of sun. And most of them actually require 6 to 8 or more sun, all the sun that you've got. So that can be tricky, I realize, with a lot of yards, with a lot of, if you're growing on balconies and things like that, it's tricky. You really have to give your plants as much sun as you possibly can. The first time that I planted a tomato on my own, I was a college student living in an apartment, and I looked and I saw a spot and I said, well, that gets sun. Yeah, it got sun from 2 to 4 p.m. That tomato did not survive. And so if you want to grow, if you have only a partly shaded area, you can try growing some leafy greens, things that aren't trying to ripen a fruit. If it's just the greens, the lettuce, arugula, spinach, especially, in the summer, it's too hot for spinach. Spinach is great in the winter. So consider the leafy greens. That'll be your best bet if you have a part shade situation. My friend says I should put eggshells around my tomato plants to stop them from, oh, we've got 2 questions here going. Okay, okay. What are some easy vegetables to grow? Okay, is that the one we're going with? Okay, what are some easy vegetables to grow? Zucchini is really great and easy, and there are just some marvelous varieties of that. Beans are also easy to grow. Tomatoes are really pretty easy. You hear people talking about all the problems that they're having with tomatoes, but that's partly just because so many people are growing them. And yes, there are things that can go wrong, but really, especially a cherry tomato, very easy. You'll get so many cherry tomatoes off of it. But you have to give it the right conditions. So we have on our website a section on getting started gardening, getting started vegetable gardening. And we talk about the things that you need to be a successful vegetable gardener. So you need full sun. You need to make sure that you're watering them correctly. You need good soil. We talk about how to make good soil. And you need to get things started well. So if you give your plants good condition, there's a lot of things that are actually quite easy to grow. Arugula, very easy to grow. Really, most vegetables. And the important thing, of course, is to make sure that you're growing something that you like to eat, because otherwise, what's the point in growing it if you're not going to harvest it? My friend says I should put eggshells around my tomato plants to stop them from getting brown and flat on the bottom. Does that work? Okay, so what that is referring to is something called blossom end rot, and which sounds really terrible. It's not a rot, it's not a disease. What it is a calcium deficiency. So that's where people get the idea that, oh, we should put eggshells around our tomatoes. Okay, but here in Santa Clara Valley, remember I said we've got this really great clay soil full of nutrients, full of calcium. I mean, you should, if you're concerned, you can have your soil tested and find out what you really have. But almost all of us have more calcium in our soil and more calcium in our water, frankly, if you're getting groundwater, than the plants could possibly use. So it's actually a calcium delivery problem, which is why you'll see blossom end rot on the earliest tomatoes when the plant is growing really fast and it's just not getting the calcium out there all the way to the fruits. So they get this little leathery spot on the bottom of them, and it doesn't affect the flavor if it hasn't gotten too bad. You can cut it off. You can still eat the rest of it if it's in good shape. And as the summer goes on, it usually becomes less of a problem. It is important, however, that you make sure that your watering is very even. Tomatoes don't like a sort of boom and bust, lots of water, dry, lots of water, dry. So try to make sure that you're keeping the water very even. Also, certain varieties are just really susceptible to this. As I say, most varieties, you might see it on the first few and then it just becomes, just disappears as the season goes on. But I have had some tomatoes where they just kept getting blossom end rot. I don't know what it was about them, but those particular varieties consistently did. So something else. Some of the paste tomatoes, for some reason, seem to be a little more susceptible to this. All right. We have another question. Should I talk about squash? I've got some great squash samples here to talk about. Haha, there we go. I'm seeing lots of flowers on my zucchini, but no squash. What's wrong? There's nothing wrong. This is perfectly natural. So I have here, let me get this out. I have this lovely squash blossom. This is a male squash blossom. Yeah, squash blossoms come in male and female. You can tell this is a male because it's got this really long stem like that. And the female squash blossom has a little baby zucchini on it. Isn't that cute? And yes, it's all closed up here, but if it were open, it would be a nice, there, a nice orange squash blossom inside there. So the male blossoms are the ones that typically appear first. So you'll often see a whole lot of male blossoms on your plant before you start seeing the female blossoms. And then once you get both of them, then you have to have bees or something pollinating from the male blossom to the female blossom. Or you can pollinate it yourself, actually. You can open up the blossom and take a Q-tip or something and transfer the pollen to the female. So, but what also happens is if it doesn't get pollinated, you might find ones on there looking kind of horrible like this. So this is one that started to develop, but then it didn't get fully pollinated and it's just rotting and is dying. So that's unfortunate. But it really doesn't take long before you'll start having beautiful squash coming out like this. And see, this one is so young that it still has its flower on it, but it's developing beautifully. And we'll have that for dinner. And this is one called Zephyr, which has these, I think it's the only bicolor squash that I know of. There's some other ones that are striped. This is the only one like this. And isn't that cute? That's a very delicious one too. And I will show you another favorite of mine, since I'm doing show and tell, are these little patty pan squash. Very tasty, very cute. I feel like I've got flying saucers in my garden. I just love them. So I want to mention too, in the same family as the summer squash are also the winter squash, which, by the way, so winter squash, that's like acorn and Hubbard and, oh, you know, all of those different kinds of hard-shelled squash. Also pumpkins. Pumpkins are just a type of winter squash that happen to be orange and have those ribs, and we call them by a special name, but they're really just another winter squash. And so those are in the same family as the summer squash. We call them winter squash because they keep all winter long, not because you grow them in the winter. Have to grow them in the summer, and then you'll have them in the, you know, in the fall, and they'll keep all winter long. Those are in the same family, so they also have this same male and female flowers. Melons are in the same family, and cucumbers are all in the same family. So here is a tiny, this is a melon flower, so much smaller. Those summer squash flowers are so big, and the little melon flowers are very small. And then this is a tiny little cucumber. So I am not going to get a cucumber from this because I picked it to show you. I hope you appreciate my sacrifice because I haven't had very many cucumbers yet. There's a lot more on the plant. It's okay. All right. Do we have another question? When it's really hot like today, is that good or bad for my vegetable plants? Some of both, really. So the plants that we're growing now in the summer are the warm weather vegetables. So that's your tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, all these ones that we've been talking about. They love the hot weather. They thrive on the hot weather. It can get too hot for them. If it's getting into the 90s, then sometimes the pollen will die, and you will not get fruit setting on some of the plants when we've had really hot weather. And this does happen occasionally. We get these spikes in weather like this, and you'll see then months down the line, you'll see a difference in the production that's coming on those plants. But in general, they like it as long as they have enough water. So there we go back to water. The water is just so important and is so key. You will sometimes see plants wilting because of the heat. And you have to be a little bit careful. If the plants are well watered, so if they really do have water at their root zone, many of them, especially the big squash leaves, but even some of the tomatoes and things like that, they'll start to look kind of dry and wilty in the hottest part of the day. And it's not because they need water. It's a way that they have of conserving the water by letting the leaves go limp. If your plants look wilted in the middle of the day in the hottest time, but then in the evening they look fine, then they have enough water. Or if they look really recovered the next morning. If they still look wilted that next morning, then they obviously are not getting enough water, and then you do need to make sure that you're supplementing it. But you really have to be careful not to overwater when they're wilting. We had a farm advisor who told us when he was called in to diagnose a problem that they were having. This was a commercial field, and he took soil samples and things like that, and he said, well, this is a waterborne disease. How can you have a waterborne disease? Because it turned out that the big boss would come along every afternoon. He would see the plants wilting, and he'd order them to irrigate more. and they were ending up drowning those plants. So make sure you have enough water, but not too much water. How should I fertilize my vegetables from here on out? So there's different schools of thought about how to fertilize plants, and some people prefer to use a slow-acting fertilizer right when you plant it, so it's just do it once and be done for the season. But you can also do something called side dressing or banding, where you add some additional fertilizer as the season goes on. So it depends on what it is. If vegetables like beans and peas fix their own nitrogen from the just from the air, they're able to gather it and fix it into the soil, so they don't need any extra fertilizer ever. Other ones like tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, they can sometimes do well if you give them a little extra fertilizer, whether you use a foliar spray or whether you dig it into the nearby. And that's so you dig a little extra into the soil around it, being careful not to hit the roots. You can also use you can use a liquid fertilizer, so you're giving it a soil drench instead. So you have a few different choices, and we talk about that. And you go, again, I will refer to our vegetable garden pages, so you can go read about the specific vegetable and how best to fertilize that one. Do we have another question? Let's see. Oh, can you eat the cucumber flowers? You could certainly eat the zucchini flowers, and that's very popular in a lot of cultures to eat these zucchini flowers, any of the squash flowers, which is a great technique if you have if you're feeling overwhelmed by zucchini. You pick those little baby ones and you eat them as babies, and then you won't have so many big zucchini to get rid of. And if you don't have enough of the zucchini, then you make sure that you pick those male flowers and not the females that are going to develop into zucchini for you. Zucchini, summer squash, all the same thing. The cucumber flowers, gosh, I don't know for sure. My guess is that they would be edible, but honestly, I never have eaten them, and I don't know. So that would be something that we would need to do a little research on. As master gardeners, one of the things that we learn is that we are trained not to necessarily know all of the answers all of the time, but how to research it, where to go. The University of California Cooperative Extension has wonderful resources out there for us. We are trying to bring those resources to you and make it easy to access and applicable to our county. And there's so much there. So if you're going to eat flowers, in general, most flowers of vegetables and herbs are edible, but always check on it to be sure. Always check, because some things like rhubarb, we only eat the stems. The leaves themselves are poisonous. So you can't assume that just because you can eat one part of a plant, you can eat all of the plant. So be careful to check on it before eating things. Okay. How do I get rid of the little gray bugs on my kale and broccoli plants? So kale and broccoli are great winter vegetables. We haven't talked about this much yet, but here in Santa Clara County, we have this wonderful Mediterranean climate where we have the warm, dry summers as we're currently having, and we have the cool, wet winters. Cool, but not cold. So we're able to garden year-round, which means we can grow things. We can basically grow things that in many other parts of the US would be considered spring plants, ones that like cool but not hot weather. So that is the whole brassica family, cole family. That's cabbage and broccoli and cauliflower and things like that. Kale, collards, beets and peas and lettuce and mustard. And there are just so many things that grow beautifully in the winter. And in general, we have many fewer pests in the winter as well. But one of the pests that you will encounter are these little gray bugs, which are aphids. So the good news about aphids is that everybody else likes to eat them. Okay, not us, but other insects. There are so many other, there are so many predatory insects that like to eat the aphids. So ladybug larvae, which are very cute. You should go take a look and see what those critters look like. Hoverfly larvae, and there are parasitic wasps, which sounds scary, but they are so tiny, very, very tiny, and they will lay an egg in an aphid. So they're so small, they stick their ovipositor into the aphid, lay an egg, it hatches, and it eats the aphid. It's like having its own little food source there, forms a little hard shell, and then will drill its way out when it has emerged and become another little parasitic wasp. So when you've got gray bugs on your kale and broccoli and things like that, take a look and see if you've got those parasitic wasps. So, all right, for the broccoli you do not want to eat the aphids, and they are often on the broccoli itself. So for that, you might want to wash it off with water. You can also use an insecticidal soap, and that's a very organic and non-toxic to most things, and non-toxic to us agent to use. But often simply washing with water is all that you really need to do. A good hard spray of water. When it's on the leaves, like of the kales, it'll often be on the older leaves. You might see the leaves curling around, and that's a sign that you might find the aphids there. You can wash them off, or you can leave them to attract these predators. I have heard time and again people telling me that they saw aphids on their roses, for instance, and the next time they went out to look at the roses, the aphids were gone because the predators moved in and took care of them. So it can be a lot of fun to see this balance of predator and prey and watch how it goes and observe some of these things, especially if you have kids or grandkids. Really very educational to see this. There's a wonderful book that UCA and our UC Agriculture and Natural Resources has published, called Natural Enemies Handbook. And if you want to check that out of the library and read some more about all of this wonderful interaction that's happening in our garden that we are generally totally unaware of. How do you make sure the soil contains no pesticides? If you're talking about your own garden soil that you, what did you like, just move into a house so you don't know what was used there in the past? It is possible to have soil tested, and there are test labs you can send your soil samples off to. Most modern pesticides do not linger in the soil. It's one of the important things these days in general. But it's possible, depending on what has been used there in the past, that there could be residue. So if you're concerned about it, that's the thing to do, is to get it checked out. Can you talk about artichokes? Honestly, I can't. I have never been very successful growing artichokes, even though some of my fellow master gardeners say they are so easy to grow. They're very beautiful, you know, and the artichoke is a member of the thistle family, and when you get tired of harvesting the artichokes, you can let them grow and bloom, and you get these gorgeous big blue-purple blossoms in your garden. It's very, very fabulous. We do have a section on our website in the vegetable gardening section that will give you much better information about growing artichokes than I can give you, I'm sorry to say. But please do go read that, and if you have further questions, ask our help desk. You know, our help desk is here and available. Normally we have call-in phone lines, but since, of course, with the lockdown, people are answering questions by email at home. So email is generally best. Email is great, though, because you can include pictures, and that can help them a lot in helping diagnose problems that you're having. So I really highly recommend talking to our help desk anytime. Yes. If I plant a hot chili pepper next to a sweet bell pepper, will they cross and make my sweet peppers spicy? No, they will not. So the reason is that when they cross, the part that's getting crossed will be the seeds. So you won't, if something happened, if there was actually a cross that was made, you wouldn't see it until you planted those seeds the next year. That is how hybrid plants are made. They have a parent line of plants and they have a mother line of plants, and they take one and fertilize the other, and then they save those seeds, and those are the seeds that they sell to you as hybrid seeds. So, I mean, you know, it's like humans, you know, we cross male and female too. So no, you are not going to get hot peppers just because your chili plant is next to your sweet bell. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. Good question. Is the compost at the Smart Station good for our gardens? To the best of my knowledge, it is. It's great. It should be great compost. And if you live in Sunnyvale, you are lucky to have that resource. I'm in San Jose, and if I were to buy compost, well, my only option is to buy compost, but as I understand it, if you live in Sunnyvale, that compost is available to you. We have a whole list of compost resources on our website. So if you're looking for compost to amend your garden, and compost is a great way to add organic matter to our heavy clay soil and help make it light. You can also use it as a mulch. Mulch is anything that covers the ground, and so it can be something organic like straw or compost. It can be something inorganic like a sheet of black plastic or rocks, which you probably wouldn't want to put in your vegetable garden. So mulch is anything that covers the ground. And the reason to put mulch on a vegetable garden is to help retain the moisture, help keep your moisture from fluctuating so much, and help keep the water in the soil. So we recommend in general that you put a good layer of mulch on your vegetables because it really helps them a lot. and it makes it more water efficient. And you can consider for something like melons that are heat lovers, putting something like black plastic down heats up the soil. Black plastic or black paper. I'm trying a black paper mulch this year, which is very interesting, and I'll see how well that works. So far, the melons are very happy, and that adds a little extra warmth to the soil, and because they really like it to be extra warm, so they're doing well. And last year my corn ears turned out patchy with lots of kernels that didn't grow right. What happened? So corn is a wind pollinated fruit. So every little silk on a corn actually leads to a kernel. So every one of those silks needs to be pollinated by tassels, which have the tassels on the top of the corn, which are the ones that have the male pollen, and it requires wind. It's not an insect pollinated plant, it's wind. So if you have a row of corn, so one single row of corn like this, and the wind blows this direction, you're only going to get some of those ears pollinated. So, or especially actually if the wind blows this direction and your row is going like this, you're not going to get much pollination at all. So what we often recommend is planting your corn in a block. So you want like a square. So you'll put several, like a block of 9 or 16 plants, or I know people who have put them in circles, something like that, so that you've got a good chance of them pollinating each other. So that's the problem with corn. Other problems with corn is raccoons really love them, and we do have a good population of raccoons here. So if you grow corn, watch out, because raccoons seem to know, I've heard this so many times, raccoons seem to know when corn is just right, and the day before you're going to pick it, they pick it first. So frustrating. And since they're very dexterous, but they are heavy, and they will often just break the corn stalks entirely. So that can be very sad, because you may have had 2 or 3 ears of corn on a stalk. They get the first one, and then the rest are destroyed. So if you grow corn, make sure that you have some plan there for how to keep the raccoons away from them so that you're able to plant them. If you have more questions about raccoons, that is a good thing to go read in our the UCIPM integrated pest management site. They have long articles about raccoons, squirrels, rats, a lot of these vertebrate pests that people are concerned about. Yeah, there we go. Excellent. If I get tired of green beans, can I let my pole beans dry out and eat them as dry beans? You can, although really they weren't bred to be the best dried beans. So I personally, if I'm getting tired of beans, I would give them to friends and neighbors rather than letting them dry. It's also a lot of work to shell the dried beans. Okay, that's my personal opinion. You can do whatever you want, okay? Beans are a really wonderful crop, though, because they will keep producing, which is why it's possible to get tired of them. But they will, once they get started going, they just keep going and keep going and keep going. Pole beans, sorry, I'm talking about pole beans. Bush beans tend to bear in flushes, which means they'll have a bunch of beans, and then they'll take a little break, and then they'll have another bunch of beans and take another break. And sometimes you'll get a third flush out of them, not always reliably. So remember back when we were talking about cilantro, I suggested that something called succession planting, meaning that you plant some and then you plant another batch and then you plant another batch separated by some amount of time. So bush beans are another one that can be useful to succession plant if you want to have a continuous source of them. And they're very pretty. I picked a bean blossom here, and they have these lovely heart-shaped leaves. They're very pretty, grow very densely. They make a beautiful border. I mean, you could mix easily a bush bean with some flowers, and it would just look gorgeous. And underneath those leaves, so you have to kind of get in there and find the beans, but you would have some beans growing. And they grow, let me see here, I've got, see if I can show you all of these. So we've got a tiny bean, just barely forming, a young bean, and a mature bean. And these are only a few days apart. Beans grow really fast. So if you are growing bush beans, pole beans, you pretty much have to be out there every other day picking. No more than every 3 days, because otherwise a bean like this will get overgrown in no time. And when beans get overgrown, you'll start seeing the lumps of the beans inside there. And if you leave a bean on there, and this goes for cucumbers and some other things as well, if you leave the over mature ones on there, that sends a signal to the plant that it has managed its reproductive task for the year and it can die now, and it will stop producing. So often when people, you got a cucumber plant and it's looking really good, and suddenly you're not finding any more cucumbers on it, that often means that you've got an old yellow cucumber somewhere on that plant hiding in all those leaves. So take a good look around and look and see if you can find that, because that will stop your production cold. Is it dangerous to use treated wood in raised beds? If it's modern treated wood, it should not be. It's true that wood used to be treated with an arsenic-based, copper and arsenic-based treatment, pressure treated, and even those didn't actually leach that much, but still, you want to be cautious and not use those next to things where you're you're growing edible foods. Modern treated wood should not be using anything like that. And we have an excellent link on our website that talks about various kinds of treated woods and how to find woods that are that will be long lasting and not toxic for you. It's a good question. Yeah, there you go. Selecting lumber and lumber substitutes for outdoor exposures. You like my gardening mug, by the way? My sister-in-law gave this to us. It came as a pair. I have the head gardener mug, and my husband has the under gardener mug. That's funny, he never uses his. All right, what's next? I planted spinach seeds a few weeks ago and nothing happened. Did I do something wrong? Spinach is a cold weather lover, and it really doesn't like hot weather. There are some very interesting charts that you can find out there that talk about the desired germination temperature for various kinds of seeds. And spinach will germinate at just barely over freezing, but if it's over 70 degrees, forget it. You'll get nothing. And you really wouldn't want spinach growing right now anyhow, because it won't do well. It doesn't like the heat. It'll bolt, go to flower very, very quickly. So you're much better off waiting until August or September to start your spinach seeds and planting them out then. And then you're going to be able to harvest spinach all winter long. It'll be happy, you'll be happy, your stomach will be happy, many spinach salads in your future. There are so many vegetables that we're able to grow in the winter, and maybe we'll have another talk about that because there's just a wonderful variety out there. On our vegetable gardening page, we distinguish between warm season vegetables and cool season vegetables. There's a few of the cool season vegetables that can be grown all summer long as well. Beets, chard, some things like that. But they will grow beautifully for you in the winter, and it's kind of fun to have a summer garden and a winter garden and have some change things up so you get some variety and a seasonality in your diet. All right, what else do we have? Please talk about some common problems I should watch out for later in the summer. Well, common problems. One, it's going to depend a lot on which vegetable you're talking about. There's a lot of things that can happen with various ones. Squash, as tough and as prolific as summer squashes can be, they are subject to something called powdery mildew, which sounds like it should happen when it's wet because of the mildew name, but it's not. It actually likes the conditions when it's warm during the day and cool at night, which is kind of our climate a lot of the time, and especially in the fall where it gets to be not quite as warm during the day and cooler at night. Powdery mildew will take off on these guys, and it'll look like somebody went out there with some baby powder and sprinkled it all over your leaves. And by the time you're seeing that, the disease is already well set in. But the other thing is, by the time you're seeing that, you're usually sick of zucchini anyhow. So, not so bad. You'll see that happening to the winter squashes as well, the hard rind ones like the pumpkins and acorn squash and Hubbard squash. But typically it doesn't kill off the vines until it's about time for you to harvest the squash anyway. You want to wait until those are really nice and have developed a good hard colored rind to harvest them. And when you do harvest them, just here's a little hint, don't use that so attractive stem as a handle, because if you accidentally break that handle, you've now exposed a wound in that very hard rind, and it's going to get it's much more likely to get infected, get a bacterial rot setting in, and so you'd have to eat it sooner rather than later. So when you pick up a big winter squash or a pumpkin or whatever, try to use your hands like this and not the handle like that. Okay. I have an okra bed which is not picking up even when the weather has been warming up. I added enough chicken manure to give it sufficient nitrogen. What could be going wrong? Yeah, okra is a bit fussy in this weather. It really likes warmth, yes, and it likes it to be warm and humid at night as well, which is what we don't have here. And I will tell you that I sympathize. I'm in the same situation. I planted okra seeds a few weeks ago. They are up and they are still just this big and they are not growing. And all I can guess is that it's simply not quite warm enough for them yet. Usually I find by July they start picking up. So let's hope for it. You and me both. Let's hope that we get some okra here eventually. Why is my mint infested with moths in the summer and get eaten by them in the summer, and how to control them? You know, I do not know anything about moths on mint. Personally, I've had problems with, I think it's either thrips or mites on my mint. And what I have tried this year, after I went off and read the UC guidelines for it, is I am trying to spray them with water every morning to try to wash off that and make it less attractive. The mites in particular like hot, dusty conditions, and they don't like it when they're getting regular water. So all I can say is that's working for me with the mites, but I don't know about moths at all. So we are going to have to research that. I suggest that you write a note to our help desk, and somebody will research that question and get back to you on it. I want to say, by the way, hopefully everyone who's listening in on this is from Santa Clara County. I mean, you're welcome to listen to this no matter where you are in the world, but the advice that we are giving is specific to Santa Clara County. It's what we're trained for, and it's what we can particularly speak well to. I believe every state and also the Canadian provinces have Master Gardener programs, and the local land grant university for whatever state or province you're in is the one who administers the program and trains the people. So you really want to get advice that's local to you. And for you Santa Clara people who are listening to this, what this means is that the advice that you find in books, on the internet, anywhere out there, from friends who lived somewhere else and have moved here and are telling you what they do, is that often the advice isn't accurate for where we live. We have this very specific climate of Mediterranean climate, and it's different. It's very different from elsewhere. So be sure that you're getting local advice. There's some really great resources out there. Texas A&M, Cornell, Oregon State, and you can use those, but try to turn to the UC resources first, because they're going to speak especially to our situation. Okay, so thanks for the rare fruit grower tip. You're most welcome. Can you talk a bit about mulching? I like chopping and dropping leaves and straw and such at the base of my veggies to try to conserve moisture, keep the soil cool. Am I setting myself up for fall problems, fungus, slugs, etc.? It is always a tricky thing. It is a balance there. I personally find that there's a payoff in having the mulch on there of the soil conservation. Slugs in particular can be a challenge in the you're not going to see those probably until the cool season. They hibernate or estivate in the summer. But and as long as the leaves that you're chopping are not diseased, you should be fine. If you ever are concerned about a disease on the leaves or an insect infestation, then you might want to rake off the existing mulch and put down fresh mulch of some sort. That's a good question. In general, it works well, and especially when you're using an organic mulch like leaves or straw that will break down and feed the soil, and it makes the soil microbes happy and the earthworms happy and the little insects that go along, your sow bugs and things like that, even earwigs, are all ones that chew on the organic matter and will and they improve the soil just by existing there. There's a whole ecosystem that we are unaware of that's happening in our gardens under our soil. And if you want to read more about that, there's some very excellent resources out there that talk about the soil conditions. So it's a good question, and I hope that helps. Covering the okra, this is with okra again, right? Yeah, covering the okra to make it humid. You know, if I would go read what our UC notes have to say about growing okra, it might be worth experimenting to see if that makes them happy. You don't want to run a risk of it getting too humid, but it might be worth a shot. Sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. You know, gardening is often kind of an experiment, and a lot of us are doing little science experiments in our garden every time we're trying things out. And that's cool. You know, it's actually one of the fun things. Try to make sure that you're doing good scientific experiments, though, or not drawing false conclusions. You know, just because something worked once, you can't conclude that that was the answer. All right, I have a lemon tree that's growing grapefruit-like things instead. I read online this is because lemon trees tend to be grafted to pomelos, and apparently the pomelos have taken over. The tree has grown quite big over several years. What can I do now to actually get regular lemons? So yes, it's true. Most fruit trees, in fact, are grafted onto some other rootstock that can be more vigorous or can confer some disease resistance, or can make it a dwarfing one or an especially large one, all sorts of things. And so what happens, though, is if the rootstock starts sending up a branch from below the grafting point, it can easily take over. So what you're going to have to do is try to see if you can find the grafting point and see if you still have some live lemon graft above the point where the large pomelo-like fruits are coming off from. If it looks like if you can't find any lemon still, then you're going to want to dig out the tree, unless you want pomelos, of course, but you might have to dig it out and plant a new one. If it is still there, you can cut off that big pomelo branch, but that can be challenging. It can be challenging to try to get it back under control. We have an excellent section on our website about fruit trees also, and where we talk about things like the grafted plants and the grafted trees and how to cope with them. So good luck with that. It can be quite a challenge. So it's possible that all the lemon branches are gone. It is possible if it's been growing like that for a while. On the other hand, citrus are really tough. I know friends who have had, they had a different kind of graft, something called a shaddock, which is also a sort of like a grapefruit, but it isn't sour. Anyhow, they were able to recover theirs. They've cut it down. They've left one branch of the shaddock growing because they kind of like having some of those around, but they do have some real lemons as well. So it's going to take a little sleuthing to try to figure out if you have real lemon branches left still. How often do we have to fertilize summer vegetables? It really depends on the vegetable. So I would refer you to our vegetable pages where we and read up on each individual vegetable to see. It depends also on what kind of fertilizer you used originally. If you use something that was slow release, it might still be releasing sufficiently over the entire course of the season. Sometimes things like pepper plants that bear heavily, people get good results if they give it a little extra fertilizer here at a particular point. So I suggest reading about which ones. Tomatoes, I personally have never given my tomatoes extra fertilizer, give them a little, I like to use alfalfa pellets. You can use whatever. I give them some alfalfa pellets when I first plant them, and I never give them any more because I get plenty of tomatoes off of them. So it really depends on the plant. It's a good question. How do I get rid of snails in my yard? Well, one of the easiest and most effective ways, and it's kind of fun, is you go out at night with a flashlight and a rubber glove and you pick them off. They will be crawling around whenever it's damp out. Where if you have sprinklers running, then you'll find them where the wetness is and lingers, and you can just pick them up and crush them or throw them into a street. Some people like to throw them into a bucket of soapy water. There's different things that you can do, but that honestly can be the most effective way to get them. You can put out traps for them of various sorts, and by trap I mean you could put like a hollowed out melon shell. So half you scoop out your melon and you've got this rind left, and you can put that down there and they'll be attracted to what's left in the shell, and it's nice and cool and dark, and so you can go out the next morning and you can find them that way. There are also some poisons that you can use. There's something called iron phosphate that's a relatively benign poison because it really only affects slugs and snails, and so you could sprinkle that around. There are other ones that will poison them, but it will also poison, say, a bird that might come and eat the dying one, and so those are not as recommended as something like the iron phosphate. But really, to have the best effect, go out at night with a flashlight and pick them off. Do a little slug and snail hunt. There are squiggly lines all over my spinach and chard leaves, and they look almost blistered. What's going on? So this is something, and it's kind of a cool thing. It's called a leaf miner. And you will also see this on some citrus leaves. You will see this on beet leaves. So the beet and the chard and the spinach are related. There are ones that are on citrus leaves. There's ones that are even on citrus rind. The good news is that it's not terribly destructive, although unfortunately for things like the beet leaves and the spinach and chard, it's destroying the part that you want to eat. So what's happening is there's a little insect, looks kind of like a bee-colored fly, and it lays an egg, and it's so small that leaves are not very thick, but it lays the egg in between the top and bottom layer of the leaves. And when it hatches, then it mines around, it eats inside the leaf. And those are the little squiggly lines that you're seeing, is this little larva tunneling along inside the leaf. So It's a great strategy from the insect's point of view because it is protected when it is inside there. It is entirely protected from any other insects or birds or something coming to eat it. It is not, however, protected from us who can see that line. We can pick off those leaves and throw them away. And they will, because we are now throwing away that little larva that thought it had that leaf to eat, and then it was going to drill a hole and drop out into the soil to continue the rest of its cycle. But if we pick those leaves off and throw them away, we are interrupting that cycle. And so you can prevent more leaf miners from propagating in your garden by picking off all of those affected leaves. And in fact, if it's only on part of the leaf, you can just throw away the part that has the tunnels on it, and you can eat the rest of the leaf and you'll be fine. You can even find the eggs on the back side of the leaves. If you look up what leaf miner eggs look like, you can find that. So if you have a very small plant where the leaf damage would be so much that it could destroy the plant entirely because it's such a small seedling, then you might want to rub the backs of the leaves and make sure that there aren't any eggs laying on there. Sorry, swallowed wrong there. There's black gunk on my lemons. What is it, and will it hurt me to eat them? So that is something called sooty mold, and it's really common. And you'll want to wash it off, but it is not actually affecting the lemons themselves. And again, I suggest going to our website, and you could read more about the citrus. But yeah, it's not a problem. Don't worry about it. You know, something else that people often see with citrus is you'll have the ends of the citrus will be all nubbly. You see this with lemons especially, and they almost look like those Buddha hand citrus. That is something called a citrus bud mite. And what happens is the mite damages the flower when it is just, when the fruit is just forming. And that's where you end up with these like fingers coming out of the end of the lemon. And again, it doesn't actually harm the fruit, although you don't get a very good lemon out of it, but they can be really cool looking. So if you can just pick those off and get rid of them. Let's see. I think I used up all of my props. Oh, right, about the eggplant. We were going to talk about eggplant. So if you see little tiny holes in your eggplant, eggplant leaves, that's something called flea beetle. That is really common for eggplant. And remember the row cover that I showed earlier in the show? So this is something great to put over your eggplants to help them get past that point where the flea beetles are attacking them. So again, you can go read about eggplant on our website, and it'll talk about the right time to plant to cover the plants like that, and it helps a lot. This stuff is so lightweight. You can put it over things and the plant just can push it right up. I was using this on my winter squash plants because I was having birds, I think, were coming and pecking at the leaves and nipping off some of the tender shoots. So I just put this over it for a few days until they started growing so vigorously that now it's not a problem. I have a green apple tree which is very tart. Can we improve the sweetness by adding magnesium? Well, you know, I've answered a lot of questions on fruit trees, but I will say that apples are something I have never grown and I've never read about. So maybe Louise has an opinion about this. My answer to this is going to be look at our website where we talk about apples. My gut reaction is that no, it shouldn't make a difference because we again have this really wonderful clay soil and which has lots of nutrients in it, and we have plenty of magnesium in our soils usually. So probably it's not going to make a difference. But you'll have to go do a little more research or ask our help desk about that. All right. Any other questions? This has been, gosh, we've gone the hour and a half that we said we were going to. I'm amazed. All right. I think we're done here. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and listening. This has been fun. It's even better if I'm able to see your faces, but I have enjoyed doing this, and I hope you've gotten something out of it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Karen, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. If you have more questions about gardening that Karen didn't get to, you can submit them to the Master Gardeners Help Desk, which is linked in the description. Or you can bring them to our next Master Gardeners talk, which will be on July 29th at 4 p.m. You'll be able to find information about it on our Facebook page. Also check the comments below for links to useful resources that Karen mentioned during the program. Some of them were on screen, but some of them were just in the comments, so make sure to take a look. And if you enjoyed this program, let us know what kind of expert you'd like us to invite next. Stay safe, everybody, and we'll see you soon.